It is August 24th, and this is a Q&A session for people in my online class. Hope you're having a great day. I've been dyeing in my dye studio today, otherwise known as my garage. You can see some of the colors here that I dyed yesterday. I'm working on some reds and oranges for a piece. And over here is my warping board, because thought I was going to warp my big loom today, which is here. But looks like I'm not going to make it. Maybe tomorrow. Warping for a big piece, so that's very exciting. All right, you all had some good questions, and I see that a couple of you have found me. I wanted to point out a couple things. Don't miss the posts that a few of you are, I think my brain needs a little jog here. Okay. The online Facebook group has been awesome lately, and thank you all for contributing, and there have been some really amazing posts in the last few days just of things that people have woven. I love seeing Debbie Adams' piece about her trip to Hatcher Pass in Alaska. That was really cool. It was the one that was wrapped around a rock. And let's see, Jenny Sinat posted a photo inspired by koi that she saw, which I thought was really cool. It looked like they were underwater. And then I noticed that Alice Martin pulled out her Hoket loom to finish her Penland piece. Alice was in my Penland class last summer, and I'm wearing my Penland, what do you call this, apron, to try to keep my clothes from being splattered with dye. Anyway, Alice was working on that again, and it was really fun to revisit those memories. Let me just look here and see if I can see myself talking. I'm seeing that a few of you are joining up, so hopefully you are actually seeing me. I'm just going to go on faith here because I can't see it on my computer. Just let me know if you, yeah, I guess I won't know. I'll just be talking to myself. So I did want to, there was one last minute question from Linda Watson. She just posted a piece, which you should go look at if you haven't seen, where you'll notice that the knots at the top and the bottom of the piece are different colors. I noticed this right away. This was a small loom piece. Oh, thank you, Sue. I feel much better that you can hear me. Hi, Sherry. I'm glad y'all are here. So I right away noticed that this piece that Linda did had a different color of warp at the top versus the bottom, and immediately I was thinking, oh, could I dye warp like that? That's really cool. How did she do that? So Linda actually said that it was a pick and pick piece, and she said that she did the half hitch header with the warp, but she didn't like how it looked, that it was white, and so she actually said she painted it with fabric paints when she was done. It looked so good, I thought that she had somehow dyed the warp. She asks, has anyone else done anything like this, and thoughts or suggestions for changing the colors of the headers. Of course, you can use the weft as the half-hitch knots. It doesn't hold as well, though. So one other thing to think about is to use colored warps. This is 12/6 cotton seam twine. Same company. It actually comes in a huge range of colors. So you can use colored warps. Linen warps come in many, many colors also. So, and of course wool warps are harder to come by, but you can dye them easier. So consider these colored cotton warps if you don't like the white edging on your little pieces. All right, so y'all had some great questions. I'm just going to see how well and quickly I can answer them. Helen asked, how do you label your tapestries? Do you sign them within the weaving itself, or do you sew a label onto the back? I recently had to put a label on one of mine, and I printed one onto fabric, cut it down small, and sewed that onto the back. And what information do you put on a label? So her first question is, do I sign the tapestries within the weaving? My answer so far has been no. I don't actually have a weaver's mark that I put in the weaving. I was just talking to an old friend of mine from New Mexico who's quite a famous Chimayo weaver. She's a historic, God, I'm so sorry, my brain is not working today. Her name is Maria Wilson. She used to be a very, very famous ikat weaver. She weaves in the Hispanic style in northern New Mexico. And she always had a weaver's mark. And so she asked me, I was at a show with her, it wasn't my show, but she asked me if I used a weaver's mark, and I said no, and she said, you have to get right on that. You need to have it woven into your piece. There are many, many people who weave a mark right into the piece, and there are good reasons for that, being that it's very hard to remove something if it's woven in, and if you put a tag on the back, someone can just cut it off. So perhaps on my next piece I will weave in a signature. But what I do now is I make a little tag. I'm going to show you. I'm going to flip this around. Here is my Emergence 5 piece, and I'll show you the back corner. Here is the tag that I use, and this is going to be backwards because I flipped it for the other camera on my phone to be forwards. But you can see that it has the title of the piece, my name. Hang on. Title of the piece, my name, what size it is, the materials, because I just use Welland cotton. If you have a long materials list, I wouldn't put it on here. And then my signature. This particular piece has a date. I have actually stopped putting dates on my pieces. It allows you to fudge just a little bit. Don't tell anyone I said this, but if there's a show date and you finished it in December of 2014 and it is January of 2017, you've only missed the window by a month. Usually shows say, 2 years. So that's a fudge, which probably isn't at all legal. But a great way to do labels, which I will probably do this in the future, is exactly what Helen was saying. You can buy this stuff. It's fabric that goes through an inkjet printer. So you could put all kinds of things on your label. I've seen people put their bios, I've seen them put descriptions of what the piece was about. That's a really nice thing to have on the back of a piece if you're going to sell it to someone, or even for your own interest later on, so that you remember what the piece was about. So you can put a lot of information on it that way. So in the future, I will weave in a weaver's mark, Maria, maybe, and I will be making bigger labels. The label that I just showed you is just made with 2-inch bias tape, which you just get at the fabric store, written on with Sharpie. And then I use some fusible interfacing to stiffen it with another piece of fabric. So it's just a stiff piece of fabric that I wrote on with interfacing and then stitched onto the back of the piece. You know what, you guys? I just realized that I am on the wrong page, and that is why y'all are so confused. I have a bunch of people watching, I noticed, that are not my online students, and so welcome. But hang on just a second while I leave a note on the other site, because I am on the wrong page. Okay. Okay. So I am really sorry, you all. Thank you for those of you who found me. I am on the wrong page. And welcome to those of you who are not in my online classes. Usually these Q&A sessions are just for people in my online classes. So this is what they're like. If you want to join my online classes, you can come to my other Facebook page and have fun with all of us. So the next question from Nancy. What yarns are best for 6-dent hokets if you don't double? So she's asking about these little looms. This is a 6-dent Hoket loom, made by Jim Hoket, and she has this loom, and I often teach in my weaving tapestry on Little Looms class that I like to double the warp on this loom, so I'm weaving at 12 ends per inch. Nancy's asking, if I warp it just like this, so I'm weaving at 6 ends per inch, what happens? What yarns can I use? 6 ends per inch is a fairly wide set, and most of the tapestry yarns I recommend are quite thin, and you bundle them multiple in a bundle. Nancy's asking, what do I use if I only want to use one strand of yarn? And I don't know of a lot of yarns that you can do that with. One of them is Lamb's Pride. It's made by Brown Sheep Company. There's Lamb's Pride Worsted and Lamb's Pride Bulky. Lamb's Pride Worsted is a little bit thin for 6 ends per inch, but you can... Oh, Andrea! That's so great. Yes, I was just talking about Maria Wilson, and Andrea is Maria's daughter. So Andrea Maria is my hero. She is amazing, and I just saw her in Albuquerque last weekend. So your mom's the best. Anyway, back to Nancy's question. There are a lot of tapestry weavers who work at 6 ends per inch. It's a great set, but they bundle their yarns. So if you put multiple pieces of yarn into one bundle, you can get a great bunch of color gradations. Tommy Scanlon often uses Freed, which is made by Norsk Fjord Fibers in Florida, sold by Sidsel Morab. It's a beautiful yarn. It has spelsow in it. It's made in Norway. And I think Tommy uses at least 4 strands at 6 EPI, maybe more than that. But it's a really gorgeous yarn. But it's too thin to use by itself at 6. Suzanne Paquette is another tapestry weaver from Canada who often I've seen weaves at fairly wide sets, often 6 EPI. She's in Canada, could be more like 7. But she also bundles, so you get a lot of really rich color when you do that. So the question about not doubling yarns, if you're not going to use Lamb's Pride, either the worsted or the bulky, that yarn is quite lovely. It's a great yarn to use. It just doesn't come in a lot of colors. Another alternative, if you have the ability to get any churro yarn from the American Southwest, is to use this beautiful yarn called churro. I used this particular yarn. This is an older yarn by Connie Taylor, who is still making yarn. She lives in New Mexico. This is a gorgeous churro that I used for my program when I was in the Fiber Arts program in El Rito, New Mexico. This yarn is probably not quite what you can get anymore, but it is thick enough to weave at 6 ends per inch. It also weaves at 8 ends per inch, so it's just a little thin. But this is a more recent purchase from Tierra Wools. See if you can see that. Tierra Wools is a weaving shop in Los Ojos, New Mexico, northern New Mexico near Chama. This is a lovely soft yarn. It is, hang on, I think it's 100% churro, but it's quite soft and lovely. Their website is handweavers.com. That would be a good option. I don't know that they carry very many colors. You might have to learn to dye your own. Weaving Southwest is another option. Their churro club has been really great. Very popular, I think. They run out of colors a lot. Their yarn is all hand dyed, really beautiful. I don't know the size of the yarn, and I don't know for sure that it will work well at 6 EPI, but that would be a fantastic option. And I think someone, maybe it was Michelle, just said that they really like the churro club. Here, let me see if I can see who that is. Yes, Michelle Dixon did say she uses a medium weight churro at 6 EPI with a wool warp. So that is a great option. All right, moving on. Again, I apologize for those of you who are on the wrong page. Okay, I'm sorry, Helen. I hope you're listening. Helen is coming to us from over the pond somewhere, and I'm on the wrong side, and she's having trouble commenting. But Helen, I apologize. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to answer another one of your questions soon. Lois asked, she wants to know what I think of the Hoket looms. What size and set do you think is the most useful? Again, we're talking about these little guys. little Hoket looms, and there's a bigger size. He actually makes an even bigger size than this. What I will say is that I do use Hoket looms a lot. Jim Hoket is a friend of mine. He is quite an amazing man. I really appreciate his kindness, his amazing skill at woodworking, and his amazing business ethics. I think there's good reasons to support small businesses that run like that. So I support Jim because I think he's an amazing person, and he works really hard to make everybody happy. That said, there are many looms out there, and just because I talk about Hoket looms a lot does not mean there isn't a better loom for whatever it is you want to do. One thing I really like a lot is copper pipe looms. I've been using them more lately. Here's an example. This is just a little homemade copper pipe loom. Let's see if I back it up if you can see the whole thing. All it is copper pipe formed in a U with threaded rod in the middle with tensioning. You can make this yourself with stuff from the hardware store for not very much money at all. You can glue the edges together with Gorilla Glue. You don't have to have solder. And basically you could make the loom at the hardware store. If you went in with dimensions and had them cut it for you, you could make it right there in about 10 minutes. So that's a good way to get some tension. The other thing I like about the copper pipe looms is that if you warp it in a figure 8 style, you can flip it over and weave from either the front or the back, which is an advantage to me. So as far as Hoket looms go, there isn't one answer to Lois's question about what set, size and set is the most useful. It depends on what you want to use the loom for, what weft you want to use, and what sort of design you want to produce. Hang on. Okay, some of you are finding me. I'm so sorry I'm on the wrong page. You all are bright to have come over here. I really, really apologize. So Lois's question about Hoket looms, the size of the loom, to be honest, the bigger the loom, the easier it is to weave on. This size is the tiny loom. It's about 4 by 6 inches. I take this backpacking because it's very light and small. But this is the size I use the most. It's the intermediate size. The more length in the warp you have, the easier it is to weave. The smaller it is, the tighter your warp gets. The less space there is to put your weft through the warp, and the harder it is to weave. So I would go with the bigger loom if you can, unless you have a size limitation, like you're taking it traveling and you want it to fit in a certain bag. Let's see. As far as set goes, it just depends on what you want to weave. Different sets and different yarns create different things. Okay, good. Thank you all. Those of you who are also looking at my business at the other page and telling people to come here, thank you so much. I'm really sorry. Not the kind of screw up I really like to have. Different yarns create different sets. So different yarns demand different sets. So a piece like this, woven at 8 ends per inch, is fairly fine. Here's another one woven at 8 ends per inch. It's a pretty good set. This is also woven, for those of you, we were talking about churro. This, hang on, there we go. This is woven with churro yarn at 8 ends per inch. It's quite, and here's the, sorry, I cannot figure out where this camera is. This, the proof of what the yarn looks like, that it's churro. This actually was a dye project I did in my dye class in college. So that particular churro that I showed you, this one weaves well at 8 ends per inch, which means it's probably a little thin for 6, but give it a try. This particular thing was woven also in college at 4 ends per inch. The chunkier the yarn, the wider the set, the less detail you get. And then the final examples being, I'm going to turn the camera around, something like this, woven at 12 ends per inch. You all have seen these pieces before on my blog. So much more detailed. See how small these are? We can talk more about that question in the class, Lois, but there are many, many things that go into that decision of what size and set are you going to use. So Lou asked, I'm realizing I'm getting lice when I end one thread and start a new one of the same color. That's a problem. So what she's saying is she's run out of thread, she's starting a new one, and she's seeing dots of the warp where she's ending one butterfly and starting a new one. I think if you're seeing lice where you're starting a new color, you're probably getting 2 pieces of weft in there, which I like to call a double shot, somehow. What I mean by that is you're getting too much weft into that shed for that portion. So you have to evaluate what it is you're doing, or please send a photo and I'll tell you. Wherever you have extra thickness of weft, your weft isn't going to cover the warp and thus you see lice. If you're splicing, you should have about half the amount of weft from each yarn overlapping, so you shouldn't have this problem. So if you're not splicing, if you're overlapping the yarns instead of dividing the yarns in half and overlapping half of each yarn, that's your problem. If you're in the Weaving Tapestry and Little Looms class and you haven't taken my Warp and Weft class where I describe all of these details about things like splicing, let me know and I'll pop a diagram into the Weaving Tapestry and Little Looms class. I've also seen a lot of people who came from floor loom weaving, pattern weaving, shaft weaving. You all love to do this thing where you take your tail and you just tuck it back into the... Hi Maria from Bogota, Colombia. That's fantastic. I'm so glad you're here. Those of you who weave on shaft looms tend to tuck that tail back in. You're putting 2 pieces of weft in the same shed as you start a new piece. That works fine when you're weaving fabric, usually the pattern or something else. The warp in the weft is more balanced in a patterned weave than it is in tapestry. And in tapestry, it's not forgiving. You can't do that. Well, you can, but you'll probably see lice. So get rid of that habit of tucking that tail in. In tapestry, we generally either leave the tails on the back of the textile or we splice them together somehow. There are various ways to splice, including if you're using a singles yarn, you can feather them like the Navajo do and pull them all the way into the weaving. You're welcome to ask questions about that in the course. So here's a great question by Michelle, and I think she found us now, so Michelle, pipe up if I'm not answering what you're asking here. She says, I'm at the point where I'm trying to get smooth diagonal lines. Is there some technique to help make these steps smooth out? In the book, The Threads Course in Tapestry, page 19, she shows an oblique diagonal. Is that what I need to do? I don't seem to be able to wrap my head around her directions. So, pardon me, I keep kicking that tripod. So, what Michelle is asking is this. This is the book she's referring to. This is Rossing's A Threads Course in Tapestry. It's a Danish book, and you can order it from her website. I actually did a whole YouTube video about this book if you want to see some more details. But Michelle is asking about this diagram. So let me back up just a second. I know, Michelle, that you've seen the straight diagonals video in part 3 of the Warp and Weft class. So that's important. It's called, it's in the section Making Straight Lines with Weaving. Well, Making Straight Lines While Weaving Angles. It's in part 3 of the Warp and Weft class. That video explains how to make a diagonal line straight or not stepped as, by noticing whether you're wrapping on a raised or lowered warp. That is the trick right there. Hill and valley threads, whether a warp is up or down, is important to making smooth lines that are not horizontal. It means understanding that you're going to create a higher step when the warp is wrapping over, when the weft is wrapping over a warp, and a lower step when the weft is wrapping under a warp. Of course, if you're weaving from the back, you have to understand that a valley thread is a hill thread on the back, so it's flipped over. This is the diagram you've probably seen in the online classes. This, hang on, there we go. This is a valley thread. See how the weft goes, it's so backwards to me, this is hard. The weft goes under the warp here, and this is a hill thread. The weft goes over the warp. This step will be larger than this step because this is a hill thread, it packs down, just assuming we're looking at it from the front. So dealing with this when you're weaving, if you start paying attention to whether you're creating a hill or a valley thread, when you're weaving shallow angles or curves, you'll get more gradual forms. And I talk about that in part 3 of the course, making lines that are curved or diagonal but are very, very straight without any kind of eccentric outlining. Okay, I think that what Michelle is actually asking about is not that, though, because she's seen that information. What she's asking about is, this is Kathy Todd Hooker's book. She's asking about what happens when I want to make steps that have a few sequences at a time. This is Kathy Todd Hooker's Tapestry 101. Kathy Todd Hooker. You can get that on Amazon or from Kathy directly. So sequences that are stacked up, you want to create a line that is smooth here, as smooth as possible, even when you're stacking sequences. This is a challenge in tapestry weaving, but you can make them smoother. Just remember, vertical lines in tapestry are always going to be stepped. The closer your set is, the less that stepped effect. So if I weave at 12 or 14 or 18 or 24 ends per inch, I don't have to worry so much about this hill valley thing because my set is so fine that it's not going to matter. But if you're weaving at 8 ends per inch, it does matter. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of a weaving demo for you, Michelle. If I had seen this question earlier, I might have done it ahead of time. I'll put the video right on the Facebook page, the Rebecca Mezoff Student Connection Facebook page where I'm supposed to be right now. I will put the video there. So to do this, you're going to end up weaving just like, I think this diagram is the best one from Kathy Todd Hooker. You end up weaving, you have to weave this part first. She didn't draw the sequences in here, but you have to weave that part first. Then she's woven over on top of this and back, and then filled in a couple more sequences on top. Those all pack down. And what happens here is this little diagonal cuts the corner off of that step. This is a highly used technique, and Kathy talks about it in her Tapestry 101 book. Rossing talks about it in that diagram. And Archie Brennan actually talks about it a lot in his weaving video series. I'm sorry I can't explain that better in this particular format, but I will make you a little video, Michelle, and hopefully that will help. It will help the rest of you also. And I'll put it on the Facebook page so that those of you who aren't in the Warp and Weft class can see it. So, Alice asked, this is a spinning question, so those of you who are not at all interested in spinning probably don't care about this, but she asked, if you're spinning your own weft yarns, what breeds do you choose, and do you like to spin singles or plied? I'm going to say again that I'm still a fairly new spinner. I've only been spinning for a few years, and I have learned a lot in the last few years, but I have a lot more to learn. But I'll tell you what I know and what I've learned from people who I've asked. I've done some spinning for small tapestries and have mostly used Leicester long wools. I've talked to Sarah Sweat about this several times. She's a tapestry weaver who uses all hand spun. All the yarn she uses for almost anything is hand spun. Often her warp is even hand spun. So she says that she'll spin whatever she can get. Recently she's talked about using Cormo, But she has friends who are sheep farmers, and she gets whatever fleeces they have and she uses them for tapestry. Of course, different fleeces have different, some of them are shinier and some of them are more matte, like a merino is probably not something that would be my first choice for tapestry because it's so soft. But it's also very matte, it's not very shiny. A lot of other luster long wool type fibers are much shinier, and those are the ones that I really like. I've used local fleeces largely from one particular farm in Colorado. The shepherdess is Robin Phillips, and she was introduced to me by Maggie Casey and another friend, Denise Renee Grace. So Robin's fleeces are amazing, and she is breeding for spinning, which means that she coats them and they're clean and they're gorgeous. Her fleeces have a lot of Corriedale, but also CVM, Wensleydale, and Lincoln. I like the luster of these long wools. They're very shiny, although I'm not as fond of combing them because I would prefer to just run them through the drum carder. But when they're long, you have to comb them. Probably makes a better tapestry yarn to comb them because you could spin them worsted, which makes a firmer yarn. I spin mostly singles, though I've been experimenting with more plied yarns as they're easier to work with. So I mostly spin singles. I like to combine singles like I do when I use commercial singles. I want to put various colors together to blend. So I wouldn't ply the yarn because then I can't use them as a single. That said, when you ply them, the yarn is much more balanced and a little easier to work with. So it can go either way. If you're using just solid colors, then ply it. I have a couple fleece samples somewhere. This is, all of these are Robin Phillips fleeces. This is Lincoln. This is a fleece I used to make this yarn, which I used for that article I had in Spin-Off earlier this year. And let's just look at how long this fleece is. This was a kind of a bear because it is, this fleece is approaching 9 inches long, so that was a hairy dude. I think his name was, did I write it down? Oh, I didn't. She names her sheep, so sometimes I know what they are. So another, here's an example of a shorter fleece, again a Robin Phillips fleece. You can see how crimpy this is. This is mostly Corriedale, and it is about 4 inches long. These are the two fleeces I've been using the most lately, and you can see these are different sheep. This one at the top's name was Periwinkle, and the one at the bottom, I don't know her name, but notice how the crimp is different in each of those fleeces. But they're very shiny fibers. So lots of Corriedale, CVM, Wensleydale, Lincoln. And then I brought a little basket of. So this is the cool thing about dyeing fleece, is that I dye it all different colors, bright colors, and then when you mix it, in either by carding it or combing it together, you can create amazing color effects. It's fun. Those of you who are spinners can ask me more questions elsewhere. So, oh, and if you're interested in, oh, and this is also hand spun purple that I did as a single, so not at all plied. If you're interested in fleece, this Deborah Robeson book is awesome. Deb is from Fort Collins, and she's fantastic, all about sheep. And then this Beth Smith book, also the Spinner's Book of Fleece, also really great. Okay, Kate asked this question sort of generally and not necessarily for Facebook Live, but she asked, do you sew your ends in before or after you take the weaving off the loom, and why? And first of all, I should say that for those of you watching who are not in my online classes, you maybe don't know this, but the backs of my tapestries are clean. I stitch all my ends in. So there's a long answer to why I do that, but that is how I do it. As do many other tapestry weavers, I am not crazy. But I do sew them in once the piece is off the loom. I sew slits as I'm weaving because it's much easier with the warp under tension to see what you're doing and sew the slits nice and evenly. But I sew the tails in when the piece is off the loom. Part of that is because I'm supremely right-handed and I have a really hard time manipulating a needle with my left hand. And I turn the piece around so that some of the tails are going up and some are going down, and sometimes they're even going diagonally. And I need to be able to move the piece around to do that easily with my very right-handedness. I could work on being more left-handed, but even then it would still be hard to stitch things towards me on the loom. Remember, I'm using this loom. It is a floor loom. It does not move around. If you are using a copper pipe loom or a Hoket loom or something that's on your lap, that's a different story. There's no reason why you can't sew ends in as you weave. I just don't do it. It's much easier for me to do it with the piece off tension. Okay. Nancy asked, my first tapestry got really narrow in the last 3 inches. After being lovely and even for 14 inches, it lost almost an inch by the time I got to the warp as weft part of the finishing border. Where did I go wrong? Was I pushing my luck by trying to weave too close to the top of my loom? Was it because I took a rug weaving class in the time just before the last 3 inches? I thought that was an interesting hypothesis. Or was it because I couldn't get the yarn bobbins through easily, so I loosened the tension a little bit? So what Nancy's saying is that she had a beautiful straight piece for 14 inches. It looked like this, and then the last 3 inches it went in like this as she was weaving. I don't know what loom you're using, Nancy, but it is always the case that you want to keep the weaving as far away from the shedding device as you can. It's almost always better for your body, and it's definitely better for the weaving. Now, it's possible she's using a loom that doesn't even have a shedding device, in which case you have to be very careful at the end of the weaving. Sorry. You have to be very careful at the end of the weaving. I'm going to assume, I don't know how wide this piece was either, but I'm going to assume that you follow my advice and you're having multiple bobbins across the weft. If this happens a lot, that someone will get to the end of their weaving and they go to one color. For whatever reason, there's a frame or there's a sky or something at the top is one color, and they'll take one butterfly and go all the way across and back. That is not a good idea, because you've gone from weaving all these different colors where there's a lot of space in there every time those colors change. The weft tension is much different. When you go to one bobbin all the way across, you're tightening it up tremendously. So that might be what you did. Definitely, even if it's the same color, keep a similar number of bobbins going all the way to the end. Another thing you may have done, I find that students want to save warp. I'm assuming here that you're using something like a Murex or maybe a floor loom or something where you have the ability to increase the amount of warp on the loom. I find that people put their Murex as far together as they can because they want to do a piece that's 20 inches long and they've decided they're going to make the warp 24 inches. That's nuts. I am a conservationist in so many ways. I think that we need to save the planet and save our materials and our resources, but for God's sake, you can waste a little bit of warp. It really impacts your piece if you don't have enough free warp to weave on. So if you have something like a Murex that you can extend, please extend it and leave yourself an extra foot or more of warp. It's really important. Your weaving is really going to suffer if you're trying to weave every last inch of warp. Warp is super cheap. It's like a penny a yard. So please just put on extra warp. That might not have been the problem here, Nancy, but that is a plea for the rest of you. Get extenders, make your loom longer than you think you need it, and just throw the extra warp away. Some of you need a 12-step program for this because I've talked to you about it before and you continue to not leave yourself enough warp. The other reason for doing that is ergonomics. You need to keep your weaving as close to the bottom of the loom, thinking about a Murex loom, if you can advance your warp, or any loom that's warped continuously. Keep the weaving as close to the bottom of the loom as you can, or on a floor loom like this. because it's better for your body. If you have to reach way up high to weave, you're going to hurt your shoulders and your neck and your back unless you drop the height of the table, which is another option. For those of you who have just joined, this particular Q&A was supposed to be on a different page, but welcome to all of you who have found me on my business page. This was a Q&A for people in my online classes, which I started on the wrong page and then didn't want to move to the right page, so because I didn't realize it for about 5 minutes. So welcome to all of you who are not in my online classes, but this might not make as much sense to you. So Nancy, the other thing you're talking about is not having enough room to get your bobbins through. So that affects the weft tension. If you're weaving so close to a shedding device or the top of a loom that you can't get your bobbins through, then yes, that is going to impact your weft tension, and you have to be really careful to do things like add extra butterflies, go to using a needle instead of the bobbins, do what the Navajo do and use an umbrella stay or something to weave that last little bit. It's hard, leave yourself more time, and make sure that you're not tightening up as you go. When things get hard, we tighten up, our weft tension gets worse, and we draw in. Happens all the time. This is why I say don't weave when you're angry at someone, because your weaving will draw in when and you'll beat too hard. So just a little tip there. I wanted to show you, hang on, let me show you the Mirex extenders. So let's see if I can show you this without completely, I'm going to turn the camera around. Here is, sorry, didn't mean to make you sick. Here's a Mirex. This is my 12-inch little guy, and you'll notice that I have an extender on here. If you buy the extender thing from Mirex, it also comes with these extra lengtheners for the feet, but you can actually make your own. So you can go to the hardware store. This is what Mirex will send you, is 12-inch threaded rod. This is a 6-inch threaded rod. This is giving me 12 extra inches of warp on my loom. All I did was buy 6-inch, half-inch, 6-inch long threaded rod and this little tiny connector. Each of those parts costs about $1.50. If you want to weave a longer piece on a Mirex, get some of that threaded rod and those little connectors. Make your loom longer, give yourself less of a headache, and your piece won't suffer when you get to the end. I also like the extenders on the 12-inch little guy. There's something about that loom. It's a little bit too short for the shedding device or something. I feel like the warp is really tight on the 12-inch loom. And with 6-inch extenders on it, it's beautiful. So the other thing that can happen if you weave too close to the shedding device is you can get ridging, where every other warp thread pops forward. That's quite common. Also, when you're having tension problems, if you can't get your bobbin through because your warp is so tight because you're at the top of your loom, you can get ridging. So that I talk about in part 3 of the warp and weft class also. But basically keeping your weaving away from a shedding device if you're using a loom that has one is a good way to help with that. Okay, and then I saw a question online about Mirex, another Mirex question. And I'm going to show you, hopefully I'm going to show you this again. Hold on, turn it around. Okay, so this is a 16-inch Mirex, and oh dear, I have 3 hands. The question was, how much does this have to be overlapped? Hang on, y'all. It's not possible for me to hold the camera and show you. So the question is, how much overlap do you have to put between the top part of your Mirex and the bottom part of your Mirex? 3 inches is the answer, and I go with more than that. So the 2 parts of the Mirex loom overlap, and you want the part that is this amount of threaded rod that's inside this copper loom needs to be at least 3 inches.
I make it more than 3 inches because when you tighten the warp after you've warped it, that distance gets smaller. I actually had a student in an online class whose Murex sort of exploded because she didn't leave enough room, and the tension is so much that at some point it just popped right off. So make sure that you have at least 3 inches. If you need a longer warp, remember you can get extenders. Okay, those were the questions y'all had for me. Does anyone have other questions? And again, I apologize that I am on the wrong page. A bunch of you probably will be watching this in the replay because you have missed me completely. And I'm so sorry. But for those of you who have joined me, who are not in my online classes, welcome. And you should take an online class, and then you can join my Facebook group and see the question and answer Facebook Lives. So, anybody else have any? Sorry, I'm scrolling and looking to see what questions y'all have. Thank you, Sherry, for coming from LAX. Okay, so actually, Michelle, back to that thing about, she was asking the question about diagonals and making them smoother. And she said, I'm trying to weave my diagonals from selvage to selvage, and I think that both books are weaving shapes, as you pointed out. This is probably what's confusing. Yes, I think that is what is confusing, Michelle, and that's why I'm going to do a little video about that, because the only way you can do that cut off the corner thing is if you're weaving shapes. You can't do it if you're weaving selvage to selvage, so that is the answer there. All right, anybody else? Bogota, Colombia. Well, it was a fun mistake because we had Maria from Bogota, Colombia, and we had Maria Wilson's daughter, Andrea, at least briefly. Thank you, Andrea. And maybe one day we'll get Maria herself here, so that would be fabulous. Buddy asks, when working with slits, do you snug, I'm not sure what you mean, do you snug the typo, keep inside edges a little more full? Buddy selvages, when working with slits, do you snug the selvages but keep the inside edges a little more full? Do you mean when I'm sewing the slits, or just when I am leaving a slit? So if you're leaving a slit and it's not sewn, actually anytime you're weaving a slit, you want enough weft in there that it fills up that space between the warps, because you don't want to see, if you pull it tight, you'll actually see a gap. So you want enough in there that you don't see a gap. And you can make really beautiful slits that you don't sew, that you don't even know aren't sewn, unless you hang the piece sideways, as long as they're not too long. So if you are sewing them, you can pull them together, but I use the same thing. I still want enough weft that they look like those wraps are just touching between the warps. I don't want to pull too tight, because even if I'm sewing, if I pull those warps together, I'm distorting the fabric, and then I can make the whole thing pull in if I have too many slits in there. I hope that helped there, buddy. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, at the slits where, okay, good. Hopefully I made some sense. I apologize, my brain is not working today. I don't know if it's because I've been in the dye studio, that's why I have this apron. I've been dyeing for a few days now. Maybe the hot air, it's really hot in the garage. Maybe the hot air is going to my head. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you for finding me in the wrong place. And we will do this again on both pages, my business page where you all are right now, and on the Rebecca Mezoff Student Connection Facebook group. All right. Have a great day, you all. Thanks so much.